Chapter 13. Mr. Twit gets a horrible shock. Mr. Twit, who thought he'd seen his wife for the very last time, was sitting in the garden drinking a mug of beer. Silently, Mrs. Twit came floating down, and when she was about the height of a house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out at the top of her voice, "Here I come, you grisly old grunion! You rotten old turnip! You filthy old frumpet!" Mr. Twit jumped as though he'd been stung by a bee. He dropped his beer and he looked up. He gasped. He gurgled. A few choking sounds came out of his mouth. He said, "Ouch! I'll get you for this," shouted Mrs. Twit. She was floating right down on top of him. She was purple with rage and slashing the air with her long walking stick, which she'd somehow managed to hang on to the whole time. "I'll swish you to a swazzle," she shouted. "I'll swash you to a swizzle. I'll gnash you to a nozzle and a nazzle." And before Mr. Twit had a chance to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out at him with a stick and cracking it all over his body. Chapter 14. The House, the Tree, and the Monkey Cage. Anyway, that is enough of all of that. We could go on forever watching these two disgusting people do disgusting things to each other, but we must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and their garden. Some house. It looks just like a prison. There's no windows anywhere. "Who wants windows?" Mr. Twit had once said when they were building it. "Who wants every Tom, Dick and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing?" It didn't actually occur to Mr. Twit that you were meant to mainly look out of windows, not for looking into. What did you think of that ghastly garden? I'll show you again. Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. "I always grow plenty of stinging nettles," she used to say. "They keep out nasty, nosy little children." Near to the house is Mr. Twit's work shed, and then to one side is a big dead tree. Never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from that tree, you can see a monkey cage, and there are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit, and we're going to hear about those later. Chapter 15. Hug Tight Sticky Glue. Once a week, on a Wednesday, the Twits had bird pie for their supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was very good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put the ladder up against the big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue was called Hug Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint along the tops of the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost in for the night into the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with the horrible hug-tight glue. The moment they landed on the tree, their feet got stuck to the branches, and that was that. The next morning, which was bird pie day, Mr. Twit would climb up his ladder again, and all of the wretched birds would be stuck in the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were, song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. Chapter 16. 4 sticky little boys. On one Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared some of the glue onto the tree with Hug-Tight, 4 little boys crept into the garden to have a little look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and the stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder against the big dead tree. They decided to just climb up it, just for fun. Nothing wrong with that. But the next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as they could be by the seats of their pants to the branches. There was no birds because the presence of the boys had simply scared them all off. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, "then it will have to be boys instead." He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat and not so many tiny little bones." The boys were terrified. "He's going to boil us," shouted one of them. "He'll stew us alive," wailed the second one. "He'll cook us with the carrots," squealed the third. But the 4th little boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, "Shh, listen, I've got a good idea. We're stuck to the branches by the seats of our pants. So quick, unbutton your pants and slip out of them and we'll fall to the ground." Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and was just about to make a grab for one of the boys when all of a sudden they tumbled out of the tree and ran for home with their naked bottoms winking in the sun.